Good morning/afternoon, everyone. Today, we're going to explore a topic that has become increasingly important in recent years, the impact of marijuana on brain health and cognitive function. We'll dive into understanding how marijuana affects the brain in both the short term and over the long haul, examine factors that make some individuals more vulnerable than others, and finally, discuss recommendations for informed and responsible use. Let's get started. Marijuana contains THC, which is the main active compound responsible for its effects. THC binds to specific receptors in the brain, known as cannabinoid receptors. This binding changes the way neurons communicate by affecting the release of neurotransmitters and altering brain signaling pathways. It's important to note that the effects of marijuana aren't the same for everyone. They depend on factors like how much is used, how often, and the user's age. Research shows that marijuana mainly impacts brain regions involved in memory, attention, and the reward system. As a result, THC influences these functions, changing the way the brain processes information and experiences sensations. Understanding these effects helps us grasp how marijuana interacts with our brain on multiple levels. When someone uses marijuana, several short-term cognitive effects can occur. One of the main issues is reduced attention and focus, where it becomes harder to maintain concentration on tasks. Alongside this, short-term memory disruptions often happen, making it challenging to retain new information. Executive functions are also affected, which means decision-making and multitasking abilities may be impaired. Additionally, users tend to experience slower reaction times, leading to decreased overall responsiveness. Concentration difficulties are another common problem while under the influence. The good news is that these cognitive deficits are generally reversible after stopping use, and they usually don't cause permanent damage. However, during periods of use, they can significantly interfere with everyday activities and performance. When we look at the long-term effects of heavy marijuana use, especially when it begins in adolescence, research shows that it can lead to lasting changes in the brain. One significant change is a reduction in gray matter volume in the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory. This reduction is often linked to difficulties with remembering information. In addition to memory issues, chronic use is associated with broader cognitive deficits. This includes challenges with learning new things and processing information efficiently. Some studies have also found that persistent users may have lower IQ scores compared to non-users. However, it's important to remember that these effects are influenced by multiple factors such as an individual's genetics and environment, which makes it difficult to attribute all the changes directly to marijuana use. The good news is that some of these long-term impacts can lessen after a prolonged period of abstinence, indicating the brain has some capacity for recovery over time. When we look at how marijuana affects the brain, age plays a crucial role. The adolescent brain is still developing, which makes it much more vulnerable to the effects of marijuana. Using marijuana early and frequently during this critical period is linked to a greater decline in cognitive abilities compared to those who start using as adults. It also increases the risk of developing psychiatric disorders, like anxiety or psychosis. On the other hand, adult brains tend to be more resilient to the long-term effects of marijuana, especially when usage is moderate and begins later in life. This difference highlights the importance of considering age when discussing marijuana use and its potential risks. There's a common myth that marijuana kills brain cells, but scientific research does not support that claim. Another widespread misconception is that any marijuana use causes permanent brain damage. In reality, lasting harm is mostly associated with heavy use that begins during adolescence. Some people believe that because marijuana is natural, it must be completely safe. However, even though it's natural, marijuana still changes brain chemistry and how the brain functions. When considering the risks, factors like the amount used, the age when use starts, and how often someone uses marijuana are all very important. That's why having well-informed perspectives, based on facts and risks, is crucial when talking about marijuana and brain health. Marijuana use affects brain function in both the short and potentially long term, especially when heavy use starts during adolescence. For adults who use marijuana moderately and begin only after reaching maturity, the lasting cognitive effects tend to be much less significant. Because of this, It's advisable to delay marijuana use until adulthood to help protect ongoing brain development. Additionally, limiting how often and how much marijuana is used can help reduce the risks to cognitive health. It's important to acknowledge, however, that we still need more research to better understand how medicinal versus recreational use impacts the brain. Overall, these recommendations are designed to strike a careful balance between the possible benefits and the risks, encouraging caution and informed choices.